Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. We'd like to thank you so much for tuning in to the Timmy Willis Show, to this special segment. The Timmy Willis Show has one of the most talented individuals that ever came out of Pittsburgh. And it brings me great pleasure to bring to you at this time, Dr. Nelson Harrison. How you doing this evening?
I'm great, man. Great to see you.
I am so happy you came on. You know, you have such a legacy, and I appreciate you so graciously want to share some of that with us.
Well, it comes with age. So I can tell you, you know, all I've been doing since I got the bug, so to speak, and that is the people that went before me within the family and in the community. There was such excellence. Mm-hmm. And everywhere you looked, in every field, you saw nothing but excellence. And you wanted a piece of that. You wanted to be part of that. Yeah. And since it was up close and personal, any piece of that pie you wanted, you could get it. And you didn't have to have any money to get it. You just had to have the desire to get it. Mm-hmm. So those of my generation and, you know, a little before me and some after me, we were blessed. We didn't have any money, but boy, we had stuff that money couldn't buy.
Yeah.
And that's what I've been doing ever since. And the years just went on by.
Went on by. Now, when did these years start? Or, I mean, where was you born?
I was born I was born in St. Margaret's Hospital, but I grew up on Blackador Street in Homewood, Brushton. Mm-hmm. Lived my first 26 years there. Okay. And I went to Crescent Elementary, went to Baxter Junior High, and went to Westinghouse.
Okay, well, what was it like for you growing up there as a little boy?
It was wonderful. First of all, Homewood Brushton was probably 80 to 85% Italian. Mm-hmm. There were hardly any blacks there at the time growing up. Our family, there might have been 8 or 9 black families on Blackador Street, you know. But we all got along. And it was it was a city, but it was rural, because my parents on both sides, my mother's family's from Alabama, my father's family from South Carolina, and so they had that country kind of thing. So everybody had a garden, and as I look back on it, when I'm going shopping and going to the stores and all this plastic food is in there, I remember we had a 1/4-acre yard on a hill. We had 11 fruit trees in the yard. We had black and white Concord grapes in the yard. We raised chickens, and we had a full garden. Mm-hmm. And we ate out of the backyard, and we were eating organic food. Mm-hmm. And I know what food's supposed to taste like, right, because organic food is real food. And that's why the difference in what we're tasting now is just like, well, you know, I'm glad I have the memories. Yeah. But everybody had a garden. Mm-hmm.
But what about as a little boy? I mean, what did you do for fun?
We played in the backyard, we played in the house, we played out in the street with each other, and we just, well, there was radio. Okay. There was no television, so I was born in 40, so there was no television, but one of our big things was on the radio on Sunday afternoon. My grandmother lived 2 doors up from us. We'd go over to Grandma's house, and all those 15-minute radio shows would come on, like The Lone Ranger and The Shadow and mm-hmm. Jack Armstrong, The All-American Boy, and those kind of shows. And we'd spend Sunday afternoon listening to those radio shows, you know, and your imagination was just going, you know. Yeah. And then at home, late at night, when you'd have The Mysterious Traveler and, and those mystery shows and all, you know, you'd listen to that and your imagination would go, right? Mm-hmm. I remember one time when President Truman, this is the late 40s, President Truman had been threatened by some Puerto Rican assassins. Mm-hmm. And I'm the second of 5, so my older brother, he's 2 years older, Richard, his name. Richard said, he looked out the window and he said, "The Puerto Ricans are coming." We didn't know what a Puerto Rican was. Mm-hmm. You know, we thought they were aliens from another planet or something like that. So he always used to scare us, you know. "The Puerto Ricans are coming," and we'd run and hide under the furniture and everything, you know. It was mostly just having fun with your imagination and all that. I mean, it was good fun. It was positive fun. There was no fighting. There was no anger. There was no hate. There was none of that kind of stuff.
Now, was this elementary school years?
Yeah, and before.
And before.
I mean, I remember World War II when strange things happened. We lived on the high side of Blackador, and so we were like 20 steps up from the sidewalk. And I remember Richard and I were out on a porch, and there was an air raid, you know, because the sirens would swing, you know, and a fully uniformed soldier with a helmet on and a bayonet, fixed bayonet, walked down the street. "You kids, get in that house," you know. Wow. They used to have blackouts. We'd have to turn out all the lights and stuff like that, you know, and air raids and all that. So those are early memories. But there were just nice things to do, you know. I mean, some of the memories that pop out at you were, you're just so glad you experienced. I remember there are 5 of us, but Richard and I were the first 2, so before the other 3 were born, we went to the zoo. Mm-hmm. I was about 1, he was 3. And we came back home, my dad took us to the zoo. "What did you see?" And I let him do all the talking because he was the big guy, you know. He said, "We saw a hippopotamus." You know?
He kind of twisted that up a little bit.
You know, but it was just like an adventure, you know. It was like being in Wonderland. Yeah. And everybody's parents were like your parents. You respected the adults. Any adult on the street could say something to you, "Yes, sir, yes, ma'am." You would not argue and open your mouth to an adult. You wouldn't dare do it, because if you did, you'd get a phone call, and when you got back home, it would be worse for you, you know. So you learned about how to get along with people. You learned respect. You learned self-respect, you know. The question always comes up now about racism. We didn't experience that until about 16. And all the young neighbors that I used to play with, when we turned 16, they started having parties and dating girls. All of a sudden, the distance thing happened. You know, because we didn't party together. Although we lived together and got along fine in the street, and we went to school together and all that, but the parties were segregated. We didn't miss anything because we were having all the fun, you know. But you could tell, I could see the distance. They spoke, you know, and everything, but you just didn't want to hang too tight, you know. So that's the only time. We went to, but we were all into trying to achieve as much as we could. The way we felt it, when we went to Westinghouse, the principal was a racist. Dr. Felton, he was a terrible racist. And we knew it. And we didn't care. You know, what made him real mad was when we would get A's. He would get upset, you know? So we achieved, you know? I look in my yearbook now from '59, and out of the college club, there were about 70 members of the college club. I think there were 6 white. All the rest were black.
Is that right?
You know, because we knew we couldn't get a commercial job, we couldn't get in a union, we couldn't get a regular job to raise a family and stuff like our white peers were doing, who were, a lot of them were in commercial courses and everything, but we were taking college courses.
Yeah, well, what made you want to be an achiever? What was that?
Well, okay, I should tell you that. My grandparents were teachers.
Oh, okay.
My maternal grandmother had a bachelor's degree in Alabama at age 18. So she was valedictorian of her class, and my grandfather was too, and when they came up to Pittsburgh in 1923, my grandmother applied for a teaching job. They never heard of black teachers in Pittsburgh. So of course they thought she was crazy. So she was a swashbuckling person. She wrote a paper, we still have it in the family heirloom. She wrote a paper for a regional Baptist women's convention in 1923 called Woman and the Scepter She Sways. My grandma Nelson didn't take anything from anybody, right? Mm-hmm. So she got involved in politics, and she became the first state president of the NAACP in Pennsylvania.
Wow.
She was the first. And she wielded some serious power from that position. So she was fighting for black teachers, et cetera, et cetera. She was the one whose access to the NAACP lawyers and people like that helped Judge Homer Brown get in the state legislature. She helped him get on the school board, okay? And it wasn't until 1946 that the Pittsburgh school board said, okay, we'll hire some black teachers. Well, she never taught again. But there were two teachers that were sort of adjunct teachers that were already teaching, two males. They were Lawrence Peeler, who was a violinist who could have played in the symphony, and James Miller, who was a pianist who was Ahmad Jamal's second teacher. Okay, they were adjunct teachers in this. And Judge Brown was he was the first black on the Pittsburgh school board, and he gave my grandmother, Sophie Nelson, her name was Sophie B. Nelson, gave her the honor of naming the first 5 black women teachers in Pittsburgh. And she did in 1946. So 2 of them became principals, Sarah Harvey and Gertrude Wade. There was Marie Mellon. I can't remember all the names. But I have a list of the names. There were 5 of them. They were her NAACP girls.
Yeah.
You know, and she picked them.
So how old were you when all this was going on? Remember how
I
old
was
you were?
6.
I was 6 years old. But
5, 6 years old.
Remember all
we were
this
around it,
going
you know.
on,
I mean, there was nothing but intelligent people. My aunt, my mother's last sister who died, she was the 4th of them. She died last September of 2013. She got her PhD in English at Pitt in 1951.
Okay.
Of course, she couldn't teach at Pitt. She had to get into the black college circuit. And she taught in Texas for a while and all that, Aunt Sophie. And she wound up being the English professor at West Virginia State. And she was chairman of their department for 28 years, and when she retired, they named the department after her. So at West Virginia State is the Sophie P. Nelson English Department. Okay. She lived to be 95. She just died. Her younger sister, Finetta, who died in 1988, was a gifted concert pianist. And she studied at the Dawson School of Music under Madam Mary Cardwell Dawson. She was the accompanist as a teenager for the National Negro Opera Company. She played at Forbes Field for W.C. Handy. She played for Marian Anderson.
Wow.
You know, I mean, this was what was going on. You know? And when Madam Dawson moved to D.C., she started a piano school and a dance school in her house on Monticello Street. And we all took lessons there, you know. And I never knew I'd be a musician. I never thought about being a musician because when Aunt Finetta tried to teach me classical piano, there was something missing there. You know, she wanted me to have the finger numbers and this number, and she wanted me to look at the book like this, you know, and I wanted to look at my hands.
Right, right.
Now, and I wanted to hear.
How old were you
when I first started studying with her, I was like 6, 7 years old.
6, 7 years old.
Yeah,
when you first
but
started.
it was like there was a disconnect there.
Right.
I had been making up little tunes on the piano since I was not even 2 years old. I used to reach up to the piano and play it like that, you know.
Right, right.
And I made up a little tune and stuff. I used to do that, but that was a mechanical thing. Now, she never played jazz and she never improvised. But she could read fly specks on paper perfectly anytime you just throw it in front of her, she could do it. I was listening. My dad had some records. We had one of those big console radio Victrolas. And he had 78 records, you know, and we'd listen to some Duke Ellington and some Earl Garner and some different stuff like that. That was in the air, you know. And every house had a piano. My grandmother played, and she would practice, you know, and you would hear her playing and all that. So it was there, music was in the air. But I never, actually, my most embarrassing musical moment, as I recall, was my 6th grade graduation from Crescent.
Okay.
Because I was supposed to play Waltz of the Flowers on the piano. I never memorized it. And so I played, my family's out there, and I went do 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 do. Just it was embarrassing. But something else happened. My brother Richard wanted to play the trumpet.
Okay.
So my parents got him a trumpet, got him a used trumpet. And we got the trumpet at home and blew air into it like this, you know. How come this thing, we tried to cover these little, it wouldn't make any sound, you know. So a kid down the street, Paul Horne, played trumpet. So we took the trumpet down. I was 10, Richard was 12. We took the trumpet down to Paul. Paul, how do you make a sound on this thing? And he told us, buzz your lip. So, oh, that's how you do it, right? So Richard started taking lessons, private lessons from Carl McVicker, who was the band director at Westinghouse, but he gave private lessons in Wilkinsburg. So Richard would start learning the fingering, and he practiced and practiced all very well.
Now, Richard, who's the oldest between you two?
I'm the second. He's 2 years older.
So that was your big brother.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. So when he brought the trumpet home, he showed me the fingering, or the chromatic scale, you know. So he'd be in his room practicing for about an hour or so every day. He practiced diligently. I'd be in the next room listening to him. When he put the trumpet down, I'd pick it up and I'd play everything I heard him play. I could tell just from what I heard what he was doing. And I learned trumpet right along with him. I never took the lessons.
And it just came natural for you.
Well, yeah, because I didn't know I had perfect pitch at the time. I do, but I didn't know it at the time.
Right. Now, were you still in, were you in high school?
No,
then,
I was still in grade school.
You still in grade school?
Yeah. So when I went to 7th grade, I was good enough to get in the 9th grade band on trumpet. Because I could read music, you know, that's not that, people make a big deal out of it, it's not that hard. I could read it, but they had too many trumpet players. So they said, why don't you play baritone horn, which is this bigger mouthpiece, same fingering as a trumpet. And they stuck a baritone in my face. I got in the senior band. I played baritone. So the 2nd year, the principal died, and the new principal didn't want the band, which met during the study hall. He didn't want us to meet during the study hall. So he cut the band. So now we only have an orchestra. We don't have baritones in orchestras. So since I was on the mouthpiece, and I had a good sound and all that, they stuck a trombone in my face. They said, you want to play an orchestra, get on trombone. So I did. I said, well, I got to learn to slide, you know. And my best friend from that moment till he died three years ago, Van Dyke Boyce, he knew a little trombone. And he knew the 7 positions on the slide, you know. So the first semester playing whole notes, he'd call out the position, and I'd play the note, you know. Yeah. We did that. But then I started taking lessons also.
Okay. Now, at this point, how old were you?
12.
You were 12 years old the first time you blew into a trombone.
Right.
Now, the first time you blew into that trombone, what did that do for you? How did that make you feel?
Well, it was just, I didn't choose the trombone.
Right.
But I was going to be in the orchestra no matter what. So I was going to play whatever instrument just to be part of the thing, you know. And I was already good on the mouthpiece because I'd played baritone. So I had a good sound and everything. So I started taking lessons from Carl McVicker on trombone. And I went through the intermediate studies in like 2 months. So he said, I can't teach you anymore, because he's a trumpet man. So then, now, in between that year, I got in my first band. And I'll tell you how that happened. Richard was in 9th grade, and I was in 7th grade. And his bunch of friends, I have one picture of this band. It's on the internet, and I'll share it with you so you can maybe show the people. But they wanted to form a social club. So they had their first meeting. And they sat around their meeting, and what are we going to do? These 9th grade kids, 14 years old. And they looked around the room, everybody played an instrument. They said, well, why don't we start a band? So, okay, so they came to our parents and said, we want to start a band. So my mother knew Warren Watson. And she called Warren. He was in law school at Duquesne at the time. And she called him. She said, Warren, the kids want to have a band. Would you be interested in coming and coaching them? He said, absolutely, he'd be glad to. So he did. Now that was my first anointing, okay? Mm-hmm. Because Warren Watson, people know him as Judge Warren Watson, okay? Because he became a first black elected judge in Pittsburgh, common pleas judge for longer than I think anybody in the country. He was a great musician.
Okay.
And he was in the Navy, and he led the Navy Jazz Band in San Diego in 1946. And what he did was he brought his big band stands and his big band book to us kids and taught us how to play Glenn Miller book and the Basie arrangements and stuff like that. He was teaching us that stuff. I got into band because they didn't have a trombone. And they needed a trombone, so I got in with the older guys, you know.
Right.
So I have one picture of that band where I was 12, a little skinny kid sitting down there. But I got in that band. But then a magical thing happened. This is where we were talking earlier about the tradition. Mm-hmm. Because Warren being a real, now he was a master of the trumpet. And he mastered the classical repertoire before he got into the Navy, but he was also a great jazz player. So he was well known in the community. We'd have rehearsal every Friday. One Friday, he brought a guy, trombone player, named Jerry Elliott. And Jerry would sit beside me with his trombone and do stuff I thought was impossible on the trombone. I'm looking at him, and it was just blowing my mind, you know. Now, who was Jerry Elliott? Jerry Elliott went to Westinghouse High. I think he graduated in '46 or something like that. He recorded with Lester Young when he was 19 years old.
19?
19 years old. He was playing all the trombone J.J.
Lester Young.
Yeah, he was playing all the trombone J.J. Johnson was playing when he was 19 years old. Jerry Elliott could write arrangements like Quincy Jones with his eyes closed almost. He was a brilliant musician. Mm-hmm. I got to sit beside him at these rehearsals.
Wow.
And ask him questions and have him show me stuff, you know? Mm-hmm. Or another time, a couple times, there'd be another guy that Warren would bring to rehearsal. His name was Sam Hurt. When he was off, he'd come back home. He was playing in Dizzy Gillespie's big band.
Wow.
So Sam would sit beside me and do stuff on the trombone, and I'm like, oh my God, what is this stuff? I want to do this. I want to do this, you know?
No, were you still in high school at this point?
I was in junior high school.
You were in junior high school?
I was 12 years old.
And all this is going on.
And I'm exposed to these giants, you know?
Yeah.
Well, that kind of exposure changes your life. You know? Now, I was listening to the music too a lot because it was all going in my ears, and I wasn't aware that I was soaking it up and that I have total recall of music until many years later. But when I was even in 4th grade, I recall, and I think this gentleman who became one of my mentors later on, and I played in his band, but I think he was the first jazz DJ in Pittsburgh. Do you imagine who that was?
First jazz DJ?
Mm-hmm.
No.
On the radio.
I couldn't.
WHOD. It was Walt Harper.
Walt Harper.
You believe it?
I never knew he was a DJ.
I used to come home from 4th grade, 8 years old. Now, I didn't play anything. Mm-hmm. And I would rush home because Walt would come on WHOD at 3 o'clock in the afternoon, and his opening theme song was Dizzy Gillespie's big band playing Manteca with Chano Pozo on the conga drums. And I used to rush home and put my ear, and I memorized that whole arrangement, just listening to that every day. Not knowing that I'd ever meet any of these people or ever know any of them, but that sound was just driving me nuts. I just love that sound. It was all just coming in there, you know. Mm-hmm. There was another song that my dad had a record of. It was called Blue Jean Beguine by Duke Ellington's band. And all of my career, I've been looking for that song. Never heard it. I broke the record. Because I was so anxious to, fooling around those 78s, they break easy. But I had memorized that whole arrangement before I ever played an instrument. So one day I was down at WDUQ, and Evelyn Hawkins was the music director. And I was just hanging out in the library with Evelyn. And she was showing me some new CDs that they had gotten in and everything. And she had a 5 CD set of Duke Ellington music that had some obscure things on it. I said, Evelyn, I'm gonna try it. I like to test myself. I'm gonna test myself. There's a song I've been looking for since I was about 6. It's called Blue Jean Beguine by Duke Ellington. I've never heard of it, but I can play it in my head. See if it's on one of those CDs. CD number 4, there it was.
Yeah.
Written by Cat Anderson. I had never heard this tune since I was 6, right? I said, Evelyn, before you play it, I'm gonna sing it to you in the key. And there's a key change in it, right? I sang the whole thing to her and did the key change and all that. I said, now play it and see if I was right. I was right on.
Right on it. Never forgot it from the age of 6. Phenomenal.
So the way I say it now to people, and I teach at a charter school downtown, and I have young kids, I'm trying to convey what music is to them, but it's hard. I say to them, you see that file cabinet over there with all that sheet music in it? How far could you carry that? Well, I couldn't carry that at all. I say, you could carry all that music in your head if you put it in there. And then you own it and nobody can take it away from you. Because they can take those papers away from you, but they can't take what's in your head. And so when you improvise, I teach improvisation and creative process and all that stuff now. What's going on in the mind of the improviser is every piece of music you ever heard in your life is in there. It's like a random access memory. You don't know what's going to come out. You're just as surprised when it comes out as the people hearing it.
Right. Now, see, you didn't jump into something. But when we come back, for the sake of our viewers, would you please explain to them what improvisation is?
Sure.
Ladies and gentlemen, we will be right back. Stick and stay, don't go away. We'll be right back with Dr. Nelson Harrison. For those of you just joining us, you are missing it. We're here with the legendary Dr. Nelson Harrison. Now, before we went to the break, we were talking about improvising.
Yeah.
Would you please explain that? What is that?
Well, then I have to share with you my first, well, I actually played my first nightclub when I was 13, okay? And from this band we had that Judge Watson was coaching in the big band art, we wound up distilling a combo out of that group. And it was almost just a happenstance because George Green was the saxophone player, one of the saxes in the big band. And later on, Jerry Byrd on guitar, he joined in. And George's older brother, Bill, and George's cousin, Jimmy West. I found out later how it happened, but they had a dance they had to play for. And the way Jimmy tells it to me, he said he was at a party somewhere in Verona, and he overheard a lady said she was having a dance and they had a $25 deposit. And he wanted to get that $25. So he walked up to her and said, well, I have a band. And she says, well, are you available? He says, when is the date? And he says, yes, we're available. So she gave him the $25. And he went to Bill Green and he says, Bill, I got $25. This lady, Bill says, Jimmy, we don't have a band. But Jimmy said, yeah, but George and Nelson and them, they play. We could get them.
Right.
And they did. So they took us out to, they were like 8, 9 years older than we were. They took us out to a place called Ross's Inn on Route 51, which the building is still there, next to the post office on Route 51. They tore everything else down. And there was a house band that played in the lounge for many, many years. It was the Bobby Jones Trio. Mm-hmm. The Bobby Jones Trio was Bobby Jones on piano, Bobby Boswell on bass, and Cecil Brooks II, or Cecil Brooks Jr. on drums. And we played for the dance in the ballroom. Well, we were just learning how to improvise and play the blues a little bit. So on our breaks, we'd go listen to them, and they were like amazing. And on their breaks, we didn't know, they were listening to us, right? So before the night was over, they invited George and me to sit in with them and play a blues. Man, I thought I went to heaven. Scared to death. But the music they were playing was so great, you know. And when you played the little things that you knew how to play, with their background on it, mm-hmm. It was like, oh my God, this is the greatest feeling in the world, you know? Mm-hmm. Well, those were the mentorship, right? That's where the mentorship came. These are the older generation professional musicians who, because we wanted it, they were so good to us. They just gave it to us. Anything you wanted, they would give it to you. They'd coach you. They'd coach you in life, keep you out of trouble, all that kind of stuff. If you were looking for trouble, we weren't looking for trouble. We were just looking for music, you know? Mm-hmm. And they're my closest friends today. I grew up to be a part of that. But Harold Betters I met when I was 15. I met Cecil when I was 13, and Bobby Boswell. Those became my best friends.
Now, did they teach you how to improvise?
They didn't teach you.
Or did you learn how
you.
To improvise?
They mentored you. No, yeah. It's not like that. See, the thing is, it's a language. Mm-hmm. And if you want to learn a language, we all learned our native language. How? We imitated our parents, right? And we spoke the way our parents spoke, mm-hmm. right? So if our parents had a particular way of saying certain words, we said it. You get to a certain age, if you're a boy and your voice drops a little bit and you pick up your phone, they say, hey, you sound just like your father, don't they?
Yeah.
Now, they don't tell you you sound like my father. You sound like your father, because mm-hmm. that's what you heard, right? If your father was Chinese, you'd sound like him, speaking Chinese, right? Mm-hmm. So what does that tell us? It tells us that to learn to speak a language, you learn it by imitation and feedback. The dogs in China understand some Chinese words more than we do, right? Mm-hmm. So it's all about imitation. Well, if you take that principle that you imitate your parents, well, in music, our parents are the masters that went before us. You imitate them, and you'll speak the language, mm-hmm. okay? Now, I can say this publicly, which I would never had said while my teacher was alive. He was one of the greatest. Matty Shiner taught Sammy Nestico, he taught Harold Bennett, he taught all the great trombone players. I never personally heard him play a note, but they said he was as good as Dorsey or better. Mm-hmm. But he showed me around that trombone. He showed me all the position. When I first went to him, he said, you don't even know how to hold it right. Well, here's how to hold the thing. And I was already in a band, and we were playing for dances, and I was doing all this stuff. You know, he said, no, do it this way, and turn your hand this way. And then he showed me another 30 positions on the slide. I said, oh, okay. Well, I learned all that, the instrument. But the language, it occurred to me, I was about 14, it occurred to me that all the language in the systems that were written in the books, the Arbin system, I studied 3 systems, Arbin, Mantia, and Ferrara, were taken out of symphonic music. I was listening to jazz. I didn't hear the same language. I'm saying, well, I can play this, but this isn't getting me over here. Because these were, right? Okay, the scales and intervals. But this was better. It's a different language. No, I want to speak this language. So what I did, I went through all my lessons, never practiced them. Sight read them all. Mm-hmm. I go home. We had record players in the 50s that had 16 2/3 speed.
Right.
Take a 33 1/3, put it on 16 2/3, takes it down an exact octave, and slows it down by half. I take Nighted Birdland, Lou Donaldson, Clifford Brown, right? Horace Silver, Art Blakey. Put that on 16 2/3 speed, and I'd sit in the dark for 6, 7 hours a day, and I'd play those solos. I played every one of them. The piano solo, I played the trumpet solo, I play them all. Put on First Jazz Messenger record, play every solo on it, can still do it. Play the solos, play the solos. All those records that were the hottest jazz records, I'd sit in the dark and I'd just soak up all that music. Well, that's really how I got my style and how I learned to improvise.
Yeah, but how were you when you were doing all this?
13, 14 years old.
13, 14 years old.
Yeah.
You were
That's all I wanted to do.
Soaking it in like that.
Right. I didn't understand what I was doing until 1973. David Baker came into town, the great David Baker, who was president of the International Jazz, the Smithsonian Jazz Masterworks Orchestra, probably the greatest authority on jazz trombone, and has written the books about it too. David came to Pitt for one of the jazz seminars, and I was playing in the Pitt Jazz Ensemble. I was playing lead trombone. I knew all the guys in the seminar except by sight, but I didn't know what David Baker looked like. I knew about him. He came over to rehearsal, and I'm sitting there saying, that's probably David Baker. And we were playing Dad Jones Mel Lewis arrangement of the Groove Merchant. And when I played, he looked over at me and smiled. I said, that must be David Baker. When the rehearsal was over, he came straight to me. He said, you're Nelson, aren't you? I said, yeah. He said, I came over here to meet you. I said, really? He said, yeah, you got any time? I said, sure. He was staying at Webster Hall Hotel. He took me over his hotel room. He was writing me up in his book.
Wow.
He had improvised one of my solos. I recorded with Nathan Davis in 1970. We had a quintet. That was Nathan's first quintet when he came to Pittsburgh. It would had Roger Humphreys was on drums, Mike Taylor on bass, Nathan and I were the horns, Joe Kennedy on acoustic piano, and Don DePaulis on electric piano. And we made a record called Makatuka. It got 4 stars in downbeat. And we did a first take on everything on that record. We did that whole record in 2.5 hours on 8 track.
That's incredible.
You know? And David had heard that. He transcribed one of my solos from that record. So he came over to me, he says, I got you in my book here. It's called The History of Jazz Trombone via recorded solos, and Tommy Dorsey's in there, Harold Better's in there, they're all in there, Glenn Miller, they're all in there, you know? And I said, wow. He said, I don't know anything about you, but I got to ask you a question. How come you don't sound like J.J. Johnson? I said, what do you mean? He says, all the trombone players who play bop play like J.J., except you. How'd you come up with a new sound? I said, I never thought of it, David, but I can probably tell you that I never listened to J.J. Remember, you copied the masters, right?
Right.
I never listened to J.J. My mind was focused on trumpet players, sax players, piano players. That's what I was playing. And I was developing techniques on the trombone to play those lines.
Right.
Because that's what I heard. I never thought of myself as a trombone player. I was still thinking as a trumpet player, right? The only trombone players that caught my ear were Jimmy Cleveland and Frank Rossellino. They played so high, I couldn't play that high. You know, so I couldn't really do what they were doing. But I liked what they were doing on trombone, but I couldn't do that. But I could play those trumpet lines and those sax lines. So Hank Mobley and Kenny Dorham, they became my people. Clifford Brown, Lou Donaldson, Donald Byrd, those became my people. Horace Silver, those became my people that I imitated on the trombone. And it was just like, okay. So whenever I play, you hear me speak the history of the language from those songs and all that. I mean, I grew up to be great friends with Donald Byrd. We played together a lot, you know, all that. I never met Hank Mobley, never met Kenny Dorham, but these are my idols, you know. So there's another funny thing happened to me then. I've written at least 400 songs. You know, I could come up with songs. I dream them up. you know.
Okay.
But I couldn't write lyrics. I used to get mad at Smokey and Paul Williams and people like that. They come up with these great lyrics.
Is that to this day you still?
No. I fixed that.
Oh, that changed.
I fixed that, man. I'm not going to let myself lay back, right?
Yeah.
So back in the 80s, actually, what made me want to do this, because Eddie Jefferson's from Pittsburgh, you know, the father of vocalese, right? And I used to hang out with him when he'd come to the Grill or Encore or somewhere like that. I'd spend a little time. But I always liked his music. And I would learn to sing those songs, like, you know, Moody's Mood for Love. I learned that when I was young, and I got the blues, and I used to sing them on gigs and stuff like that, you know. So whenever I had a chance to talk to Eddie or something like that, I would do that. But when I was 14, 1954, the first Horace Silver and the Jazz Messenger record came out. I have it in my car right now on CD. And I was listening to their solos, and I could hear them talking. But I didn't know what they were saying. But I could hear, there's a conversation going on there. What in the world could they be saying? But I was 14, I didn't know what they could be saying, you know? So when I decided to tackle this lyrical thing, I said, I'm gonna go back to that music. I've got enough life experience now. Maybe I could figure out what they might have been saying. I went back and I started lyricizing those tunes that I used to copy all the solos to, right? Thus far, I've done 125 tunes of jazz standards with my lyrics, okay? Because the lyrics just flowed because I had the life experience to pull from, you know? And
so you remember the first one you did?
yeah, and I'll give it to you right now. Okay. I'll give it to the audience, okay? The first one I did was Anthropology, Charlie Parker's tune. And I had heard a lyric to it. I tried not to write songs that already had lyrics because I wasn't trying to be commercial with it or anything. I said to myself, if I can write to Dizzy Gillespie, Charlie Parker melodies, I can write lyrics to anything. This is the hardest melodies out there, right?
Okay.
So I started with Anthropology, and Walter Davis Sr. had written a lyric, but I studied anthropology in college, so I know what anthropology is, so his lyric didn't really fit the title as well as I thought it could. So here's my Anthropology. And whenever, I tell you this, whenever I finished the first verse, the second verse came to me, so it's the whole thing, right? Take a look at all of them bones, sticks and stones. They came from people living long ago. Ancestors who were human, standing on their feet, swinging to the beat back in the Stone Age. Talked about the birds and the bees, named them all. They spoke a language everybody could dig. Signs of the times with hands and feet. They painted pictures of life. I bet it really was neat. Millions of years ago in Kenya, when even Adam lived in a tree. Africa was a place that started a race. Then they originated history. So if you want to really be hip, take a tip. One evolutionary fact is true. Brothers and sisters, all are we. But if we can't get along, we're going to cease to be. Just because you stand on your feet, don't forget you had to crawl before you learned to walk. Man had to hunt for all his food so he could eat. Way before he learned that he could grow it. Never mind what language you speak. It's a fact. We all could scat before we learned to talk. We needed to communicate to make each other aware there was a lot we could share. Now that we're in the modern era, we seem to have forgotten a bit. We don't think we're the same. We're losing the game. Why kill each other for a different name? I think we better try to wake up. Now's the time, or else there'll be nobody else around that we can call our brother friend. You better listen or you will never notice the end. That was it.
It was good.
Okay.
Now let me ask you this: when you perform out, do you ever perform that
sure, I do.
live?
I do them sometimes, yeah.
Yeah. And it just flowed just like that. And you said the second
came out.
verse just
I was cracking up.
Just came out.
And then I'd call Ahmed Jamal because he's one of my close friends, you know. And I called Ahmed and I said, "Guess what I just did?" He said, "What?" I said, "I got this lyric I just wrote to Anthropology. Check me out." Because I always go back to the masters to get their approval or their blessing if I can, you know. So I sang it to him. He said, "You rascal."
He loved it.
Keep it up, yeah. That's what he did. So I did. So every time I do a tune, I'd call him up and check it out on him, you know, and he liked it and all that. And if he approved of it, then I'm thinking I'm on the right track, right? I had about 10 tunes. I had an old Apple IIe computer with a dot matrix. I'm typing them up on that. I had about 10 tunes. I said, you know, I ought to write a book with these, you know? So the tunes started to flow, and they started to flow. Then I said, okay, I'm going to make it. I'm going back to those albums, and I'm taking Horace Silver and the Jazz Messengers, everything on it that's not already lyricized, I'm going to do all the rest of the tunes. Well, John Hendricks had already done The Preacher. He'd already done Doodlin'. And I found out later that he did Room 608. So I left those alone. But I did all the rest of them.
Right.
Okay? And then I took the next Jazz Messenger record, which was Live at the Cafe Bohemia, and I worked on those. And I took the one that Donald Byrd joined the band when they had Nika's Dream and all that on it. Now, Horace Silver had written Nika's Dream, so I left that alone. But I went back and started doing some of those tunes, right? And then I got about a dozen of Byrds, a dozen of Dizzies, a bunch of, you know, all the great things. Then I found out a funny thing. A lot of the musicians today don't even know these tunes. They don't even listen to them. There's about 26 tunes that everybody's playing for the last 35 years. They're playing the same old tunes.
Same old
They
stuff.
don't go back and visit them. Then I had an idea. I said, well, what I'm going to do is to write to the original version. And because I can hear the nuances in the phrasing of the instruments, I can make my words fit those phrasings exactly of the original record, to make people go back and listen to the original record. Because what happened is, these guys go to school, they get the fake book, the real book, where some students at Berkeley transcribe these melodies and half of them are wrong, right? And they're learning all these tunes out of this book. And they never heard the original recording.
Yeah.
They don't hear the harmonies, they don't hear any of the things that were going on those recordings, just what some distilled version by an amateur put those things down. And so whenever the way I was trained by, I played with Joe Westray's band for a long time. I played with people like Carl Arter, people like that. You come up on the bandstand and you think you know something, they'll change the key on you in a minute, man. And if you can't play in that key,
yeah.
you know, Rabbit Barnes, right from this community, Eddie Rabbit Barnes. You know, these were the giants. You know, so whenever somebody comes up, wants to sit in with me, and they got a piece of paper in their hand, I change the key on them. If you can't play in any of the 12 keys, get off my bandstand.
Right.
It's not the place for you to do that. But what happened is the classroom invaded the nightclub. Nobody wants to hear you play 16 notes all night long.
Right.
They want you to tell them a story, right? What if you went to church and a preacher stood up there and just read to you? No amens, no nothing, no patting the foot, no shouting. That church would be empty, right? Unless you're Presbyterian like I grew up. But the point is, you want somebody to preach, right? Well, when you played jazz in the era where there were a lot of clubs in Pittsburgh, the audiences were so sophisticated. They knew what you were supposed to be. They came to get fed. They came for you to give them something that they could feel. And the audience at the Crawford Grill, that's the best audience you ever play for. Because everybody out there knew what you're supposed to be doing.
Right.
And if you weren't doing it, they'd look at you like you're crazy. What are you doing up there? You don't belong up there.
Right.
You know? But if you got the audience at the Crawford Grill to respond to you, you could go anywhere in the world and you get the same response. I played in Joe Westray's band from '62 till he died. Joe said, you play in my band, you can play with anybody in the world.
Yeah.
He was right. So I had my dream come true. I only wanted to play with two bands, Art Blakey and the Messengers and Count Basie. The only two bands I really said are on my bucket list, right?
Well, look here. When we come back, would you please tell us about what that experience was like for you?
Be happy to.
Ladies and gentlemen, we'll be right back. Don't you go nowhere. We'll be right back with Dr. Nelson Harrison in a minute.
Well, I got up this morning, got me a jug and laid back down. Got up this morning, got me a jug and laid back down. I was searching for the future, but the blues was all I found.
those of you just joining us here, we're here with Dr. Nelson Harrison. And before we went to the break, you were sharing with us your experience with Art Blakey and the Jazz Messengers and the Count Basie Orchestra. I mean, that's pretty big. Would you tell us, what was that experience like for you?
Before I do that, I talk to the young people for a minute.
Hey, please.
Dream. Dreams come true. They absolutely come true, but if you don't dream, you have nothing to come into your life. You have to dream it first, and then it'll happen. Now, what I'm getting ready to tell you is a couple of my dreams came true. In fact, all of my dreams came true, but these were two big dreams that I had as a youngster. So when I was listening to the Messengers, I was imagining myself being in the Jazz Messengers. But also, I knew that because I'm a third-generation college graduate on both sides of my family, I knew I had to go to college on it. And I knew music school didn't respect jazz, so I wasn't going to go to music school. But I had decided, because Judge Watson would take me to the Vets Hospital to play for the patients every now and then, and I could see that music had a really great effect on mental health. And I decided I wanted to be a music therapist in 9th grade.
Wow.
So I said, well, if I'm going to be a music therapist, I'm going to have to go to medical school and maybe become a psychiatrist or something like that. That's all I knew, you know, I thought that was it. So I set out to be that. So I started Pitt in pre-med in 1959. And all of my college courses were science courses. So, you know, I was a zoology major, undergrad. Then I went to Pitt Med School for a year. In 1964, I got in on, that's before affirmative action or anything, I was the only black student in the first 3 years of that school.
Wow.
They didn't want me there.
Yeah.
And I gave them an excuse to kick me out. I failed a couple finals, they kicked me out. But I learned the basic sciences. You know, I had biochemistry and all that kind of stuff. But then while I was in med school, I discovered this field called clinical psychology. I said, well, that might do it. So I went and took night school, about 18 credits of psych, because I had no psych in undergraduate school. So I took that, and I got into graduate school of psychology, clinical psychology at Pitt in '68, and I got my doctorate in '74. And that's 40 years ago. Okay.
That's a lot of studying.
No, it was just school. That's not a big deal.
No big deal.
No. But there was this, I'm going to put it, there were forces pulling on me. When I was in the academic world, the academic world tells you to do one thing, do it well. But don't do more than one. Don't be diversified. The real world tells you to be diversified, because one thing isn't necessarily going to serve you. In addition to that, if you're black, you better have plan A, B, C, D, E, F, and G, because none of those plans may allow you to express yourself under normal circumstances. So I got into Pitt Med School. I was still playing, you know. And I happened to be playing at the Crawford Grill with John Hurd's quartet, and Roger Humphreys was on drums, and Freddie Tooks was on piano. And the Glory Lynn show was at Syria Mosque. Well, the Jazz Messengers opened up for Glory Lynn. Well, they finished their half of the show. It came, Curtis Fuller and Freddie Hubbard and Art Blakey came up to the grill. I'll never forget this, because when they walked in, the place was mostly empty. We were playing Nika's Dream, okay, one of their tunes. And I was soloing with my eyes closed, which I always do, because I practiced in the dark. When I opened my eyes, Art Blakey was standing at the end of the bandstand. I said, whoa. You know,
Recognized him right away.
How could you not recognize Art Blakey?
Art Blakey.
He's like one of your idols, you know.
Yeah.
So I introduced him, because I was the spokesman for the band. And since it was Art Blakey, we featured, Roger's a little younger than me, so he doesn't remember it as well as I do. But we featured Roger on Strike Up the Band, just fast. Just to let him show off in front of Art Blakey, you know. So then we took a break. We came down, the stage was up higher than it was before they closed, but came down the steps. Art Blakey was standing there. He looked at Roger. He said, I don't talk to no African drummers. I cracked up, you know. That was a compliment, right? So we sat down. Art ordered some fried chicken, and we sat there in the booth the same booth August Wilson used to sit in. And Art Blakey turned to me, and this is what he said. Now, can I swear? No, don't
No,
swear.
that's a family show.
Okay, I'm not going to swear, but you'll get it. Art Blakey turned to me, he said, Bonesky, I like what I'm hearing. Why don't you come on, go to New York with me? That's a dream come true.
Mm-hmm. Just like that.
Just like that. Why don't you come on, go to New York with me? I said, I'd love to, Art, but I'm in medical school. You ain't no doctor, you musician. Okay? I said, yeah, Art, but the life, best life you ever had. He got so mad at me, he wouldn't talk to me, man. He talked to John and Roger. Every now and then he'd look over at me and say, musician. Do like that.
Yeah.
Now, here I am, almost 24 years old. I had to make, that's a career choice opportunity, right? How do I leave medical school when the whole city of Pittsburgh is saying, we finally got one black person in Pitt Med School, to go up to New York with Art Blakey, who wasn't getting any real respect, wasn't making any kind of money, and there was drugs all over there, all that kind of stuff. We knew all that stuff, right? We knew that. He's still our musical hero, but we knew all the other stuff was there, that lifestyle. I wasn't going to leave school to do that.
Right.
So that was the end of that dream. Didn't happen, okay? So I go all the way through my graduate school, and in June of '73, I was at home, asleep, and my phone rings at 12 midnight. It was a Thursday night, I'll never forget it. My wife's saying, who's calling you at 12 o'clock at night? Pick up the phone. Nelson. Yeah? This is Eddie Lockjaw Davis.
Oh, yeah.
I almost choked. I said, hey, Jaws, what's happening? I'm with the Basie band. And Al Gray is leaving, and David Baker said you were the cat. Dream come true. I said, oh my God. I'm on my internship at St. Francis Hospital. I got one more year and I'm done. I can't quit, right?
Mm-hmm.
I said, Jaws, I'd love to do it, man, but I'm in school. Yeah, they told us you were in school and all that, but you know, you were the first call. I said, oh, I'm sorry, man, I got to turn it down. And, okay, we've got some other cats to call. Guess who they got? They got Curtis Fuller.
Curtis Fuller.
Yeah. So, I'm at Pitt. I'm making no money at Pitt. Got my doctorate the next year. I start teaching there, and I'm making $12.50 an hour, shrinking heads for the Student Health Service and teaching. Nothing happening. And turn on the TV, there's the Basie band on the Grammy Awards,
Wow.
on the Kennedy Center, and I'm saying, I'm supposed to be there,
Yep.
and I'm doing this, right? 74, they come into town, and John Hurd had joined them. So now he started out with me. He's from Manchester, right here. He started out with my band. He was one of our first real bass player we had back in the early 50s. So John's in the Basie band. He keeps saying, get my boy from Pittsburgh, you know? So I went down to Heinz Hall, and they took me backstage, and I met the Count for the first time. So Mel Wanzo was the lead trombone player, another mentor, idol. Taught me a lot. I played second trombone to him. He was so great. And Curtis was in the band. Mm-hmm. I have a picture. I haven't put it on the internet yet, but I got a picture of me with my arm around Mel, my arm around Curtis, and they're saying, you're the cat we keep trying to get. What's the matter, man? You scared when you coming out, right?
Yeah, right.
So I didn't go out. So then I got a call again later that year. Curtis left again, and they called me again, and I turned it down. Al Gray came back. Still turned on the TV saying, shh, whatever. Mm-hmm. Then they called me again in '76, and my wife was in graduate school, and they called me again, and I turned it down, and a guy named Dennis Wilson got in. So I'm saying to myself, boy, if something happens to the Count and I don't take this thing, I'm going to really, really get depressed or something, right? Mm-hmm. But I didn't know if it would ever come around again. But apparently there was enough out there in the grapevine, you know, that I was still on the list. So I was teaching human sexuality at Pitt in '78. I got another one of those phone calls. This time it was Fred Wesley from James Brown's band.
Right.
Now I had met Fred in '68 because I played with James Brown in '67, '68 at the Civic Arena. Okay. And the second band, Fred was in it. That's how I met him. So I got this call. Nelson, it's Fred Wesley. I said, hey, Fred, what's up? I'm with the Basie band. I said, oh, yeah? He said, look, I got to go do a record for Bootsy. Could you come and finish out the tour? I said, yeah.
Took that one.
He said, can you be in New Orleans in 4 days? I said, yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, I'll have Sonny call you. He'll give you all the details. And hung up the phone. That's how it happens, right? So people know that's how it really happens. So Sonny called me. He was a trumpet player, long time in the band, and he was the straw boss at the time. Ah, so you're finally gonna make it, huh? Okay, okay. You know, it was one of those kind of calls.
Right,
you know?
right.
He says, you got a brown suit? I said, yeah. He says, you got a blue suit? Yeah. You got a gray suit? No. He said, get one. So I went down to Hughes and Hatcher and bought a gray suit. Mm-hmm. He sent me a ticket. I got on a plane, went to New Orleans, right? So make a long story short, when I got down there, the first time I had a chance to go, and we were playing at the Hyatt that night in New Orleans, and I'm cutting this short because we're running out of time. I walked in the ballroom. First person I saw was Dan Rather. Mm-hmm. Second person I saw was Helen Humes, and we were taping for 60 minutes.
Get out of here.
And I got on camera about 30 seconds. I said, I just made history. I never went back to school, never went back to Pitt, never went back to any of that academic stuff, you know.
Is that right?
So you want to know what that was like?
Yes.
I used to pinch myself every night. I said, am I really here? I can't believe it.
Well, what was that like working for James Brown?
Oh, it was a ball because it was incredible stuff, you know. James was a taskmaster with his band. You know, we were an augmented band. He brought his band in. It was Bootsy's band because Maceo had just left. Bootsy was 17 years old. I have some pictures from it. Bootsy was 17 as a bass player. But James rehearsed his band until they tasted their own sweat, man. He worked them and worked them. He was a hard-working cat. And we were just augmenting the band. There were a bunch of horn players they hired from the union. So, but just to tell you a little side story about that, the first time, the unions had just merged. The black union and the white union had just merged in '65. So this was '67. And Jack Purcell had the contract. So he hired, there were like 12 horn players. He hired 4 black guys. He hired me, Chuck Austin, Art Nance, and Jimmy Armstrong, who played alto. Yeah. So we were the black guys who played with James Brown. If there hadn't been a merger, there'd have been all black guys, you know what I mean? So, second year, I didn't get a call. James came back into the Civic Arena. I didn't get a call. I'm saying, I called Jimmy, I called Art, I called Chuck. Did you get a call? No, nobody called us. Same setup though. One of my friends from my symphony days, you know, trombone player, they had hired him. And Bob Schmaltz, and he got a PhD and he was teaching down in Little Rock. And Bob called me up. He said, Nelson, what are you doing Saturday? You working? I said, no. He said, you want to do the James Brown show? I said, you got the job? He said, yeah. He said, but I got another job I got to do. I said, yeah, I'll do it. I showed up at rehearsal, and all these white guys sit up there. I showed up at rehearsal. I said, And they're all cutting their eyes at me, you know. I said, who has a contract? This trumpet player, Joe Rotunda, had it. I said, how'd you get it? He was in the band last year. Well, I want to make sure I had good players. I said, anybody play better than me, stand up right now, you know?
Right.
So that's how I got in the second show, and that's where I met Fred. But I went back in James's dressing room. I said, James, next time you come in town, here's my card. Give me the contract. I'll hire some white guys, but I'll hire some black guys that can play that should have been in these bands, right? Right. You know what James Brown told me? He said, we can't find any black musicians in America.
Really?
Because all the unions had merged, and all the black locals had given up and joined into the white local in the building and all. We gave up our records and all that kind of stuff, and we joined in, and they just never called us. He said, we can't find black musicians in America. okay? That's what it was really like, in case people think it wasn't like that. It was. You know, we always had some competent players, super players, but all of a sudden, you know, we don't get the jobs. You know, so I wound up being a token in a lot of the bands because they knew I had the symphony thing. They knew I could do all that stuff. So I played in the Heinz Hall Orchestra for about 6, 7 years. I played in the Stanley Theater Orchestra, and I got to play all those shows, but I was the only, you know.
But you did play with Count Basie.
2 years.
Yeah, so how did that finally come about? 'Cause,
well, like I said, I
at
went to
some
New
point-
Orleans, and I earned a job, you know, and I stayed with him. You know, I did 2 tours. I came home for a couple months, and I played with Kenny Clark when I came home. He happened to be in town. But I had a chance to go to Japan with them for 6 weeks in 1980. And that was a ball. But it was a surreal experience. It's every night, it's like, am I in some magical place? The Count is the sweetest guy in the world and the most competent musician. He was such a genius that you just were in awe of him. And I sat right at the end of the piano, and he would do stuff on the piano. It'd make you turn around and look at him, and he'd go, But here's what people don't understand about that band. They initiate you in that band.
Okay.
Even though you got the call and you finally go out there, they're going to test your mettle to see if you really belong there. So, first time I sat in a band, they don't tell you what song they're playing. They just play. And if you can't keep up, they'll give you a ticket home the next day. And nobody will say a word to you until you pass that initiation. You have to prove it. So, I got in there and they tried me. You know, I was hanging. But first time I sat, from my experience, I'm playing second trombone out of 4. Mel Wanzo's sitting on my left. And first tune they played was a thing called the Wind Machine, Nestico chart. I had not known that chart. And I'm listening, and Mel had pulled the music out. He would move like nobody could see him move. And they're doing all this, setting me up. It's a setup.
Right.
So I'm listening to the music. Fortunately, I can retain. And about 20 bars into the tune, after I found the chart, I came in, and that was my second lesson, because they don't play it the way it's written. They don't phrase it the way it's written. They stretch it off the page. They play vernacular. They play street language on that. That's why they sound different. If you hear Sammy Nestico's band play his own chart, and hear the Basie band play the same chart, it's 2 different worlds.
Okay.
It's because the Basie band does something to those notes, right? So I said, oh, they play street. Okay, I was into that. Thanks to Joe Westray and Warren Watson. Warren was teaching us how to do that when we were little kids. So I got through the first tune without making a mistake. Turned to Mel. I thought maybe I was in the middle of a tour, that maybe they had a set that they were doing.
Right.
So I said, what's next? He said, I don't want you to lean on me too much. I said, okay, it's on, right? You know, whole first set, man. Last tune of the first set was Whirlybird. It was a cha-cha-da-da-da-da-da-da-da-ya-da, real fast tune like that. I had heard it, but see, I heard the record. What they do to it is not a record.
Right.
And they gave me the lead trombone on that. They tried to trick me, but I didn't go for it.
Okay.
I didn't go for it. So Count had never said a word to me. Second set, come back out. Oh, and in between the sets, they're all standing over in the corner talking. I'm standing by myself, you know. Nobody saying anything to me. I was 30, well, what was I, 37, 38 years old? 37. I didn't care, you know. Count walks by me. He looked at me and said, you play the blues? I said, yes, sir, I was born. Go back out. He started playing tunes like Shiny Stockings, all you've heard them, you know. I knew what the tunes were. But he directed that band from the piano. And he would play what he wanted you to know. Like if he'd hit a G on the piano, ding, 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 that meant the next tune was April in Paris. If you couldn't hear a G, you didn't know what the next tune was.
Okay.
That's the way it was. And he would decide on the spot what the tune was going to be, based on what he did on the piano, right? So about the third or fourth tune, Mel says to me, 335. I said, oh, he's talking to me? Okay. So I find 335, a song called Good Times, and it was chord changes. That was my solo. Well, it was just a blues in C, you know. I mean, you don't need the chord changes for blues in C, but that's what was on the chart. So the count and the rhythm section are playing this blues in C, and it's swinging, man. You're sitting in your seat going like this. It's feeling so good, you know. He said, when the chief looks up, that's what we called him, when the chief looks up, you go out front. I said, okay. So I'm waiting. Finally, the count looks up at me, like that. I walked out front. Now, when you're out front, you can't see the band. Mm-hmm. And I didn't know the chart. I didn't know how it ended or anything, right? So I start soloing. I have a tape of this because I had a friend in the audience who taped this for me. So I have a tape of this. Yeah. And I'm playing, and I have a photo from it too. So I was playing this blues. I got into the third chorus, toward the end of the third chorus, and I started an idea with a quote or something that wasn't going to end at the end of the third chorus, and I could feel the drum crescendo come up. You know, they went right back down to see where I was going to go with it. I said, wow, this feels like a combo, you know. They let me have a couple more choruses. Mm-hmm. After the fifth chorus, I could feel that swell coming up behind me again. I said, I think it's time to get out of here. Right. You know, so I went up high and did something real fancy and turned around to go back to my seat. Everybody was smiling at me like this. And I was in the band. Yeah. Then they're the warmest cats in the world. Mm-hmm. They're the most beautiful cats in the world. Once you pass that. Yeah. Now, I'll tell you one little quick story, and this is an authentication of what I just said, because we never rehearsed ever. Ever. Uh-huh. So we're out in Los Angeles, standing on the street, and this was when Grover Mitchell would come back in the band and replace Mel. And I'm standing with Grover, Oscar Brashear, Danny Turner, and Harry Sweets Edison. And we're talking. And Sweets said, when I joined the band, they didn't have any charts. That's when Billie Holiday was with them, right? Right. He said, we had 100 arrangements for Billie Holiday, none of them were written down. Wow. And I said, well, where's the music? He said, you know what they told me? Oh, you'll find your part. That's the real deal. That's the real deal. It's not incredible. What you think or what they're telling you in classrooms and all that. Mm-hmm. That's not what it's like. That's what it was like. Can you speak the language? Do you know the language? Can you hang in there with those cats? And it's not on a piece of paper. Mm-hmm. Try to tell somebody that, they think you're lying, but you tried. Right, right, right.
Now look here, you also worked with Sarah Vaughan?
Yeah, when I was with Basie, we worked with her out in San Carlos, California.
Yeah, now what about...
Joe Williams.
Yeah, Joe Williams, Dionne Warwick.
Oh, I have a photo. It's on my... By the way, I'm the owner, founder of the Pittsburgh Jazz Network.
Yeah, we're going to talk about that, too.
I have a picture on my page on Pittsburgh Jazz Network. I was with Joe Westray's quartet, 1964. That was also the first Motown tour. And Joe was the president of the Black Local, so he had the choice of the gigs, you know. So Art Nance was on sax, I was on trombone. Joe was on organ, and Sylvester Gaucher was on drums. Most of the time, sometimes Philip Terrell was on drums, Patty Terrell's brother. We got to play a show in July of 1964 in Erie, PA, in a gymnasium under a basketball net with Dionne Warwick. I'm standing on this side of Dionne, and Art is standing on the other side of her, and there's a basketball net over her head. I got a photo of it. Yeah. And she didn't have any music. And she had about 2 records out, Anyone Who Had a Heart and Don't Make Me Over. And we just played her stuff, we knew it. Right. But what I found out about Dionne that day, because those Bacharach tunes would change meter, right? You know, they skip a bar, or they go to 3/4, 2/4, 2/5. And Dionne was late, so we didn't get a chance to really run over her tunes. And Joe missed one of those odd bars, right? Do you know Dionne, she got behind the organ and she pulled out those stops and she played it like this, and we said, whoa, look at her play. Dionne could play, man.
I didn't know that.
Oh, man. You know, we did that, and then I played with her a number of times since then. And then she was very much into astrology and all that. She used to always talk about being a Sagittarius and all that. I knew we had the same birthday. I didn't know we were born exactly the same day. Okay. Yeah.
Yeah. Now look here, the Supremes and Temptations.
That was the Joe Westray Quartet.
Yeah.
Gaucher was on that gig.
Okay.
That was at the Pitt Field House. That was the first Motown tour. Supremes and the Temptations. That's with Florence Ballard and Marion Diane and the original Temptations.
Yeah.
They didn't have any music. And we just stood behind. We knew the stuff from the record.
knew the stuff from the
we
record.
just stood and played. You know, it was great.
That's incredible, man. No
that's-
sheet music.
They didn't have anything. They didn't have music till like the third time they came in.
Is that
Then they
right?
started getting arrangements and everything like that. But the
Yeah.
first two times, no, it was just.
Okay, let's talk about Lena Horne and Tony Bennett.
I got pictures of that too that you
Yeah.
can add in here when you show this, when you edit this. That was at Heinz Hall.
Okay.
That show, I was in the Heinz Hall Orchestra. That was '74. Played with Lena and Tony. Boy, what a show! And the other token black in the orchestra was Paul Ross. He was in the Pittsburgh Symphony by then, you know. And so he got in the string section. I was in the horn section. So we were upstairs in the dressing room, and Lena took a picture with us. So
Get outta
I got a
here.
picture of Lena standing between me and Paul.
Yeah.
And then when she did her one-woman show, I got a chance to play with her again.
Oh, okay.
Tony Bennett, one of the sweetest guys in the world. Just a wonderful human being. Loved the music. And I found out something about Tony just about not quite a month ago that sort of blew my mind. Knowing everybody loves Tony Bennett. Walt Sims Jr., the great artist. Great, great artist, okay? Paint you like a photograph and never redo anything. Walt was up in Erie last year sometime at a show Tony was doing, and he got a chance to talk to Tony. And I saw Walt, he says, Tony Bennett still remembers that tour you gave him in Pittsburgh. He said, that was the best time he ever had on the road. I said, wait a minute, Walt, I never told you about that. You must have talked to Tony, because nobody knows that. He says he told me about it, and he said that was the best time he ever had on the road. And here's what happened. We came out of the stage door at Heinz Hall, and there was a white limo waiting for Tony. And I was standing right beside him, and Tony's so cool, he turned to me, he says, what's going on in this town? I said, well, Dizzy Gillespie is performing at Walt Harper's Attic. He says, is that downtown? I said, yeah. Where is it? I said, it's about 5 blocks down that way. He said, can we walk there? I said, yeah. He told the limo, go ahead. He put his arm around me. We walked over to Walt Harper's Attic.
Get out of here.
Came up the stairs. Me and Tony Bennett walked into Walt Harper's Attic, right? Well, there's Dizzy on the stand. Earl May was on bass. Ed Cherry was on guitar, and Mickey Roker was on drums, right? Tony got up and sang a couple tunes, man.
Yeah.
He still remembers that.
Yeah.
You know?
Yeah, that was a special moment
Yeah.
for him, man, you know?
And then after Walt's place closed at 2 o'clock, Dizzy and Earl and I went around the corner to the coffee shop and sat there having coffee till 4:30 in the morning talking about the Baha'i religion. Years later, I ran into Earl May on a cruise ship. No, before that, I ran into him at a country club out Pittsburgh Field Club. I was playing with George G's band, and the Mercer Ellington band was there, and Earl May was playing bass with them. Earl saw me, he says, last time I saw you, me and you and Dizzy were talking about you know what I mean? That's what the tradition's like. It was up close and personal, man.
Right.
There was no egos involved or nothing like that. We were just people sharing our life experience with each other and digging it, you know. I didn't have a camera or take a, because I wasn't even thinking about that.
Right.
But it happened.
Now look here. Well, I'm looking at Aretha Franklin,
I was
Sammy Davis Jr.
Yeah. Aretha was the last show at the Stanley before they closed it.
Is that was the last show?
That was the last show at the Stanley. And she brought some cats from Detroit in her band who became friends of mine since then. Marcus Belgrave was one of them, and we've been friends ever since then. Chippy Outcalt, who played trombone, he sat beside me. He was in the Billy Eckstine band. And he kept asking me, he says, is Booney Hazel still here? How's Booney? I said, Booney's here. Booney used to play lead trumpet with Billy Eckstine's band. He sat in front of Dizzy and Miles and Fast Navarro.
Right.
And he busted his lip, you know. But Booney, I said, yeah, Booney's still here. I gave him, you know, I hooked him up. And who's the other? Phil Ranelin, great trombone player from Detroit. I met him. We became friends there for the Aretha Franklin show, you know. Sammy Davis came into Heinz Hall with George Rhodes Orchestra, and his lead trumpet was Phip Richard from Texas. And Phip sat right behind me. And he started playing, and I heard the Basie phrasing. And I turned around and I said, when were you on the band? He said, you too? I said, yep. You know, there's a language there, you know?
Yeah.
I was walking down Chinatown in San Francisco back in the early 90s, and there was a street saxophone player playing there with his tip thing down there, his case open for tips and all that. And he was playing some nice saxophone, and I heard the Basie phrasing. And I walked over to him, I said, when were you on the band? And he told me, I gave him $5.
Get out of here.
I heard that phrasing. It's a different language.
Yeah.
And everybody who came through that knows that language. It's a whole other thing, man.
You recognize it right away. Now, also, Johnny Mathis, Bobby Vinton.
Those were all Heinz Hall gigs when I was in that orchestra. I played all the
Liberace, man.
I played all the Liberace shows. I played all the Bobby Vinton shows. And then when I'm out playing country clubs, and people see my complexion, and they always try you, you know. How about a polka? Huh? Can you do a polka? And I sang, Moja droga yachi kocham. He said, I sing Bobby Vinton's old polka and sing all the Polish. Well, I did it. I heard it 40 shows, you know. I mean, come on, how could you not learn it, right? But they don't know that.
Yeah.
And they're all like shocked, you know.
And you put it down on them.
Yeah.
Now let's talk about, when we come back, you are an inventor. And I'm not going to say a what, but you are an inventor, and also you have the Pittsburgh Jazz Network. We haven't talked about yet. So will you talk about that when we come back?
Yes, indeed.
Ladies and gentlemen, stick and stay, don't go away. We'll be right back with the legendary Dr. Nelson Harrison. We'd like to thank you for tuning in. I hope you're enjoying yourself as much as I am, and I'm pretty sure you are, as we continue this journey with the legendary Dr. Nelson Harrison. So we're going to continue, and he is an extraordinary inventor, and he's so lovingly going to share his invention with us. Would you share that with us, Doctor?
Meet the trombetto.
Trombetto.
From the ghetto. I say that because I was trying to think of what to name it. And I use a trombone mouthpiece on it, so that's where the sound comes from. And it's short, so Edo means short. So Trombetto, of course that's an Italian name, I found out, you know, too. But I call it the trombetto from the ghetto because people call it a trompetto, a trompino, a trombetta, and they call it everything but. So they can get the O on the end, because if you try to look up trombetta, you're not going to find it. It's trombetto. But here's how it happened. As I told you before, I was originally a trumpet player. So I know the fingering, all right? And since I played baritone, it was on this mouthpiece with the fingering, so I knew how to do that. So when I came off the road with Count Basie in 1980, I was going by Gelman Loan Company, East Liberty, and I saw this funny-looking horn in the window. Now, I say funny-looking because I've seen pocket trumpets, but this was not a pocket trumpet. This is a pocket cornet. And it had an extended lead, I've lost the lead pipe now, but it had an extended lead pipe out about this far and a little cornet mouthpiece in it. And when I played it, it sounded like a kazoo. And I said, oh man, I paid $115 for it. I said, I wasted my money on that. It was a brand new horn. So, because I was looking for a gimmick, because I was going to come back out playing combos and all that, and I needed a little entertainment gimmick. And I thought people didn't know I played trumpet, and you know. So a couple days later, before I put it together, I said, I wonder if my trombone mouthpiece will fit in that hole. And it did.
Mm-hmm.
I said, I wonder if it'll be in tune. And this great big sound came out of it. I said, oh, I got a new horn. You know, that was 1980. Mm-hmm. So I played it like this for 10 years. I even walked in Jerry Better's club with it under my sweater.
Get out of here.
And nobody knew what I was going to do. I got up to the microphone. They said, what's he going to do, sing? And I pulled this thing out. Everybody, they fainted.
Mm-hmm.
So I'm turning it this way so they can't see what I changed on it. But playing it like that, I only had about 2 octaves. That's the lowest note on a trumpet, natural note, right? That's a high note on the trombone mouthpiece. That's a high F, right? Mm-hmm. And most trombone players never play higher than that. I knew the mouthpiece could go lower than the horn, but I didn't have enough tubing. So I used to go to the brass and woodwind shop in Carnegie, and one of the owners was a guy named Ted Weir, master brass technician. He works for Beguine now, and they're
okay.
And Ted used to show me in the book all the instruments that they messed around with in the 17 and 1800s before they wound up with the instruments that we know in the symphony today. Mm-hmm. You see euphoniums with 9 bells and 11 valves. You see the craziest looking plumbing things you ever saw in your life that they were trying. The original cornet was a sheep's horn with holes in it and a brass type mouthpiece. Mm-hmm. Now cornets look like trumpets, right?
Right.
So I said to Ted, we're always talking about doing something unique with an instrument. I was doing pretty good financially that year. I said, Ted, I need another valve and I need another loop of tubing so that I can chromatically go as low as a mouthpiece. Now, he's a player, so he knew what I wanted, you know. I said, I don't care what it costs. He said, let me work on it. So I gave him the horn. 6 months later, $1,200 later, mm-hmm. he gave me this. Yeah. So it would fit in a case. It sits down by itself, mm-hmm. like this, right? I do this to it, looks better, and I can hold it with one hand.
Right.
Okay? Now, then I learned a trick with my lip that lets me go higher that I wish I knew how to do when I was with Basie, because I'd still be out there. Because Dennis Wilson had this way of playing high notes, and he was a star with the Basie band, and I couldn't quite play as high as Dennis. Now I can play 2 octaves over, mm-hmm. right? But watch what this loop does. Now, the way these valves work is when all they do is redirect the airstream because there's no sound in this instrument. There's no sound in it. No sound. Mm-hmm. All the sound is in the mouthpiece, okay? So. Okay. That's the lowest E flat on a piano, on an acoustic piano. Mm-hmm. Now from that E flat, I'm going to go up 6.5 octaves. That's 1 octave. 2, 3, 4, 5. 6.
Wow.
That's lip.
Yeah.
That's muscles. There's lip muscles, right? So I call it the world's horniest horn. I can play melody anywhere I want to now. I could. I have just to tease myself, you know the song Night in Tunisia?
Yeah.
It has a cadenza at the end of it for the trumpet player. Well, I made up my own cadenza, and it goes like this. Right. Then I go the other way. I go one more way.
Wow.
Okay? So it's all on here, and it's a lot of fun to play. The bell's very close to your ear, so you hear your sound back a lot. And then because this valve is independent, I find little tricks I can do with it, like that's a hard change to make on a regular trumpet. I can do it with this valve. In the middle range, I can duplicate all the notes with this one. I can do all kinds of crazy little tricks with it. So the real thing that made it super unique, because this is the only one in the world.
That was my next
The
question.
only one. People say to me, why don't you get it patented? I said, I don't need to get it patented because nobody can copy it. I didn't find that out till 2003. I was doing a festival out in California with at Santa Cruz with Randy Weston and Donald Byrd and Larry Ridley. And it was getting a lot of attention, you know. And so I came back and I said to Ted, Ted, could you make me a spare? And he said, no. And I said, why not? And then he told me the story. He said he tried 6 or 7 or 8 valves to make this loop work, rotary valves, all kinds of different valves. And he said, this is the only one that worked, that would be in tune. And you know, it's a little shorter than these valves. So I said, so, you know. He said, well, this valve was made in France in 1870.
Oh.
And it comes from a horn that doesn't exist anymore. And he was keeping it as a souvenir. And he said the only other valve like this he's seen was in the Arthur Pryor Museum. Now, Arthur Pryor was John Philip Sousa's star trombone player. He had a secret valve on his trombone. He never let anybody see it. It was this valve. And when I was studying classical trombone, we had to play Arthur Pryor solos. He was doing that with the valve. But then I found one last little poetic story, and that is the great Matty Shiner. He passed away in January of 2003, and I asked his daughter, Sylvia, I said, I never asked Matty who he studied with. And she said, well, he studied with Octavio Ferreira, who I went through that system. He studied with Simone Manti, I went through that system. And she said, he studied with Arthur Pryor. I said, son of a gun, I never knew that. You know? So this is a real unique thing now.
Yes, it is. Very much
So I'm the best trombetta player in the world.
Now let's talk about the Pittsburgh Jazz Network.
Okay. I don't know if they can see this.
Oh, yeah. Pittsburgh Jazz Network.
Okay. That's my online jazz community that I put together in 2008 just to try to tell the traditional story. It's not been written. A lot of the books out there are people guessing at things, and they're going to illegitimate references. They're not doing diligence on the information. You see names spelled wrong. You see instruments connected with the wrong people's names and all that. And everybody, all the students in the schools now are quoting that stuff, and it's not correct. So I said, since cyberspace sort of made it accessible, I started this platform, and I named it the Pittsburgh Jazz Network. And I right now have 3,000 members. I reach every continent on the planet. And I can reach literally with what they call emergence in the network, I can reach about 6 million people.
Yeah. I'm a member.
Oh, good. Okay, good, great. And you see that I can put all kinds of content on that, and so can you. So I invite the members, although a lot of people don't take me up on it, that's okay. I invite the members to tell their story. You get a page, you can put as much stuff on. I got 600-700 videos on my page. You can put as much up as you want. You know, it's not gonna stop, and I'll never charge for it. I don't intend to make money. I'm not trying to bleed people to make a living off of that. I want to provide a service, so I pay for it myself. I get some donations every now and then, but I pay for it mostly myself. And I invite people to use it. They can post their gigs on it, And if you post your gig, I'll send it out to the whole membership, which you can't do, because I'm the only one who can reach everybody. And so you play a gig down in Penn Avenue, and somebody in Malaysia will hear about it because they're members. They'll see it.
Right.
They may never get there, but so what?
Right.
Your name is over there.
Yeah.
Well, you know, they may go listen to some of your music if you put it on your page. If you don't put it on your page, don't blame anybody, you know. But we have probably 12,000 photos right now, and we have over 3,000 videos. And I put up blogs and articles and stuff, and so do other people. I'm finding out some of the families of some of the great Pittsburgh jazz icons have taken advantage and joined the site. Now we have Maxine Sullivan's daughter is a member now. We have Sonny Clark's sister and nephew are members. Kenny Clark's son is a member. We have different people, you know, from the families, you know, that are there. And I invite them, take those photographs, you know, put them up there. Tell the story of your relative, because if you don't tell it, nobody's going to tell it. And they won't be known, and they should be known.
And if they do tell it, they might not get it right. So
they might not get it right.
Tell it.
Right. So if you tell it from your perspective, you can tell the truth about it. Then people will know that this Pittsburgh is the jazz capital of the world.
Yeah.
So that's why I'm doing it, and I'm on it every day, and I maintain it myself.
Right.
So I invite everybody out there to join it. It's free.
I strongly suggest that you go onto the Pittsburgh Jazz Network, because you'll really find a really good time and a very informative experience.
We have, I have a player on the main page. I have 100 songs on there that I've sampled from Pittsburgh people, you know, and I change it every now and then. And then, of course, you can put, you know, 100 or more songs on your own page. So this is really big if you want it. And I go to YouTube and I find videos of Pittsburgh-related people and stuff like that, and I post them up there, and other people do as well. And it's wide open. There's no censor but me.
I tell you what got me is when I joined, man. You welcomed me, and also the late great Luther D.
Luther,
Ray.
yeah,
he welcomed me as well, and
right.
I appreciated that.
Well, that's what it's about. We have to have a place, because since we lost our venue in the community, when there was a black local, or when, I should put it this way, when the locals were segregated. Local 60, the white local, had a club, and 471 had a club. We had a club, and each club was open all night. So when musicians were traveling, they could go to that club and meet their peers and exchange information and pick up players if you needed and all that kind of stuff. When we merged, we gave up our building, and they closed down their club because they didn't want to socialize with us. So that happened all over America. There are no musicians clubs in America anymore. They used to be everywhere. And I think the only place, Buffalo kept their club, and Memphis kept their club, the black locals. Otherwise, they're gone. And so we've had no place to fraternize, and the only time you see your fellow players is at a funeral or something, you know? I mean, that's a drag, you know?
Right, I agree.
So I'm trying to give, and then a lot of people aren't on cyberspace, but at least I'm trying to provide a place in cyberspace where we could all commune, because as a member, you can comment. You can say anything, voice your opinion. You know, don't be afraid to voice your opinion. The athletes do it.
All the time.
The athletes criticize one another, or they extol one another, or whatever, and they're making millions of dollars. We're afraid to talk about ourselves and our craft, and so we're not making any money. You know? I just heard that women's sports are getting ready to have panels on television talking about women's sports to try to raise their profile. Musicians go over in the corner and talk about sports. Why don't they talk about music? Why don't we talk about a Sonny Rollins solo now? I'll give you one example of it. One night, I was in Roger Humphrey's big band when he was at Dow's on 9th Street. And one night, me and 3 sax players. It was Luce DeLute, Robbie Edwards, and who was the other one? I forget the third one. I think it was Tony, it might have been Tony Campbell. We went over to Tom's Diner on the South Side. Because we were having a discussion about tenor sax players. And let's go get something to eat. Keep talking about tenor sax. We were so excited about it. Just tenor players. We weren't talking about alto players. We sat at Tom's Diner talking about tenor players till 4:30 in the morning. They start eavesdropping on us, and both the booths on either side, then the waitresses start eavesdropping on us. And finally somebody said, "Who are you guys?" And one couple got up and said, "This is the best eavesdrop we ever had. Who are you guys? Where are you playing?" And all we were talking about was tenor players. But that's how exciting that conversation is for musicians. Why don't we share that with the public? That's what this is about. Share that with the public. The other one thing I want to allude to back when you talked about improvisation. Sonny Rollins, and I have a video of him saying this up on the network. Sonny Rollins said, when you improvise, don't think. Thinking gets in the way. Don't think. The mind is not capable of playing jazz. It takes the higher self to play jazz. It takes the spirit, it takes the heart, it takes all that. The mechanics of playing it have to be automatic. It's like if you're driving, and you're driving in traffic and you're using a map, you're going to wreck. You're going to hit a pothole. You're not going to make that turn if you're looking at a map, because it doesn't you're in traffic, and traffic is never the same. You go home every day, traffic's never the same. When you're playing jazz, it's never the same. So how could you prepare out of context to do something that's never the same? Can't be done. So to do that is to not understand that it can't be done. But once you understand, you can fly. And when you can fly, you don't worry about the wind currents. You just fly with them. That's what playing jazz feels like. And it's the greatest high I ever had, and that's the only high I ever needed.
Well, I tell you what, sitting here talking to you, man, you soar. You fly and you soar, and I am so grateful that you came down to share some of your story with us, man. It's remarkable. I mean, I really enjoyed it.
Well, I thank you for allowing me the opportunity and to at least document it, because a truck could hit me tomorrow. I don't know.
Oh, I know. It ain't gonna happen. But let me ask you this: is there anything that we haven't talked about that you would like people to know?
Yeah. I'm going to speak as a scientist, as a metaphysician or something like that. What we need to know is the world that we live in is a world that's based primarily on what we see. We don't hear very well. And the sense of sight is divisive. It is designed to distinguish between contrasts. The sense of sound is a unifier. If we could hear, then we could experience harmony. There's no harmony in sight. It's distinctions, right? If you had a blackboard and you wrote in black, or a whiteboard and you wrote in white, you wouldn't see it. You'd have to have a contrast to see it. But in sound blends all kinds of variables together. I just heard on the news that the other day that the known universe, you hear people talk about the Big Bang and all that kind of stuff because the stars are receding on it. The known universe is the visual universe, right? Guess what? A few years ago they discovered dark matter in the universe. Now they've discovered, and they've said, that 96% of the universe is dark matter. Only 4% of it is visible. Hello? So we've been spending all our theories on 4% of the universe and ignoring 96% of the universe, okay? So when you have a mind that thinks that music is about notes, and they ignore that music's about silence. Silence is the greater part of music, and you interrupt it when you play a note. Don't play a note in the silence unless it's beautiful or meaningful. Otherwise, leave the silence alone. The silence is already perfect. And the note doesn't take on meaning unless it's in the context of a silence. And I could get real technical on that if there are any musicians out there that know the Overtone, Undertone series, and you look at it on a piece of score paper, and you see that middle C, the first overtone is an octave, And the first undertone is an octave. That means there's space around that middle C, or else you wouldn't hear it. And then the overtones and undertones get closer and closer and closer as you go in either direction. Otherwise, it would just be noise.
Right.
So what separates meaningful sounds from being noise is silence. Now, you get some people that master silence, like Count Basie or Thelonious Monk, they can do some stuff with silence. It just lays you out.
Mm-hmm.
You know?
Remarkable.
Yeah. So you have to have both of those things. It's not about how many notes and how fast you can play it or anything like that. Sometimes it's about not playing.
Yeah. Well, you've accomplished a lot in your lifetime.
Well,
You said your dreams has come true, and that's what I was going to ask you. Is there anything that you haven't done that you would still like to do?
Oh yeah, oh man, that's the big question. There's so many things I'm feeling like I'm running out of time because there's so many things I want to do. If I just sat and listened to my archive, it would take me 30 years in real time.
Mm-hmm.
I don't have 30 years. I have 80,000 photographs. I got them all up here. I know what they are. But for me to find one takes some hours, you know. But just to process things in real time that I want to do, I don't have the time. I'll be 90-something before I can even scratch the surface of that stuff. So I have to find another way. It's like if you want to travel through space, they say you got to go into hyperspace, right? Well, I've learned in the creative process, when I need to do something that takes hours to do and I only have minutes to do it,
Mm-hmm.
I've learned how to switch into a hyper-consciousness and get it done. I do it all the time. It's the only way I get it done. Because if I had to do it in real time, there's no time. But I practice that so I get better at it. Mm-hmm. You know? That's why when I show up on a gig, I don't practice. I never touch my horn unless I'm on a gig. I don't have time to go home and play. I don't have time to do that.
Yeah.
But if you're paying me, I'll show up on the gig. I will make the gig.
Mm-hmm.
I'll rise up to that occasion, whatever it takes to do that, I'll do that. But I'm not going to sit at home and play my horn by itself. I don't even like to play it by itself.
Right.
But when I'm driving my car and listening to music, that's when I learn it. And I've played a lot of times songs I never played before. Somebody says, here, can you play this song? Yeah, I can play it. I heard it. Somebody asked me to play something that I used to hear on the radio when I was 10 years old. He put $5 down and I played it. And I took the $5, you know. I had never played it before, but I knew how it went.
Right.
All I have to do is know how it went. If I know how to find it, put it on the horn, that's automatic. Mm-hmm. It's just like us talking. We're not reading notes of one another, right?
Yeah.
That's all.
So for the people who would love to come hear you play who haven't had that pleasure, where can they catch you at?
I play every weekend. Right now, well, at least for the last 13 years, I've been with a band called the Blues Orphans. They're a fabulous band. We do something that nobody else does. We have about 70 original tunes. Mm-hmm. And Bob Gabig is the band leader since 1979. He founded a band, he and his brother plays harmonica. And we call it Schism and Blues, or we call it all kinds of things, you know. And we have about 5 or 6 CDs out. And we talk about what's on the news. Our songs are about what you're seeing on the news. And every time the news article comes out, Bob writes a new song on it. So now we got a song about the Fukushima leak. We got a song about everywhere I go, I got to take a selfie, you know. We got another song called Smartphones, Dumb People. We got another song called I Feel So Lonesome, I Had to Text Myself. Yeah. You know, we got all that. It's a humorous kind of thing. We got songs about the island of plastic in the Pacific. We got songs about the climate change. We got all kinds of songs about what's going on in the world today, and we're doing it in song, but with a lot of intelligence and a lot of meaning to what it is. So it's an entertainment band. Plus, we play, we improvise. It's different every night. We're jamming. We're right. Actually reaching for it and playing out, and it's a beautiful band.
Where's the venue?
Well, we play the Penn Brewery every first Friday of the month. They usually book us for a year in advance, so Every first Friday from 7 to 10:30 we're there. And we play, this Friday we're playing at 565 Lounge in Bellevue. From 8 to 11 we play the Vivo Kitchen in Sewickley, the 2 Fridays, the last Friday of the month. And then we were doing James Street. We did James Street for 2 years.
Okay.
You know, but then they let some other bands in because we've done our run there, you know. So
No, can they find this information on the Pittsburgh Jazz?
they can find everything on Pittsburgh Jazz Network.
Okay.
Just go on there
Very
and
good.
you'll know. Because I
Good.
make sure I post all the gigs up, and
Right.
everybody else who's playing, who
Okay.
wants to post their gig can do it. And the club owners can post their gigs on there too. Well, we got
Okay.
the club owners are members.
Very good.
So it's there, and that's the best way to find out what's currently happening. Because a lot of times the stuff that's in the newspaper is old, and they just don't take it and change it out, and you don't really know what you're doing. So,
Yeah.
yeah.
Well, I tell you, man, I appreciate you.
Many thanks.
I really do, and I thank you so much for coming down.
It's been a
and
pleasure.
as long as I'm doing it, you always got a place to come here, man, with me.
No, thank you. I'm familiar with this. Over the last 30 years, I've been in and out of here for a number of things. I'm glad it's still going, and kudos to the PCTV people for keeping the studio active and allowing people a chance to do this kind of thing, bring the community out to the world.
Exactly.
Appreciate that.
Well said. Ladies and gentlemen, thank you so much for tuning in. And remember, no matter what you do, make somebody happy, make somebody strong. Till next time.